The cold stone walls of the chamber are still, suffocating in their silence. The faintest flicker of candlelight dances across the room, casting long, trembling shadows. You step closer, and there it is, the body of a king, lying motionless on the cold marble table. Charles II of Spain, a ruler whose name echoes through history, now reduced to a lifeless husk under the gaze of royal physicians. The air feels thick with dread, and as you breathe it in, you feel it settle in your chest, heavy and unsettling. The smell of death hangs in the room, mixed with the faint scent of melted wax from the candles that surround the body. With every branch of the Habsburg tree twisted back upon itself, the blood that ran through Charles's veins was thick with inherited defects. The toll of this lineage was profound. By the time Charles was born in 1661, the damage was irreversible. His inbreeding coefficient, his genetic score, was higher than any other royal in history. Higher, even, than the offspring of siblings. A child born to incestuous parents would have been better off than the King of Spain. What lies within this fragile corpse will defy the very laws of medicine. Seizures would seize him for hours at a time, leaving him motionless, vulnerable, unable to govern his own form. At times, his limbs would freeze, leaving him paralyzed for days, a king powerless in his own kingdom. And then there were the melancholic episodes, a dark descent into catatonia, where Charles would simply stare, motionless, into space for weeks on end. It wasn't until the 20th century, when genetic research could finally uncover the truth, that we understood just how deeply Charles II had been damaged, and their subjects, believed should never be revealed. But Charles's death was different. The circumstances of his reign, his inexplicable health, the silence surrounding his very existence, these all called for answers. No larger than a peppercorn. How could such a tiny heart sustain the life of a king? Instead, there was only a pale, lifeless void where his circulatory system should have been. You can't afford to miss the full depth of this story. Subscribe now or head to the comment section to lament why you still not subscribed to Dark Ancient Stories. Don't miss out on this. His organs were not just malfunctioning, they were corroded. The lungs, once the breath of an empire, were no longer functional, and his intestines, disintegrated, putrefied, as though they had been decaying long before his death. The physician's notes, written in sharp, precise Latin, described this body as something other than human, a body too damaged for a person to survive in. The physicians stared in disbelief. How was this possible? How could a man live with such a defect? But the heart was only the beginning. But what they didn't understand, what no one could understand, was that these were not just random misfortunes. Don't wait until you miss the next shocking historical revelation. I dare you to tell us why you haven't subscribed yet in the comments. They were the horrific manifestations of genetic collapse, the unraveling of a man who should never have been born. His body was falling apart in slow motion, like a ship sinking inch by inch beneath a dark, unforgiving sea. His physical deformities, his mental struggles, they weren't random. They were the inevitable result of the generations of flawed genetic code that led to his birth. The body was not just that of a man. It was the body of a king, a symbol of divine right. But what they were about to discover would challenge everything they thought they knew about human anatomy. The deformities that plagued his face, his mind, his very being, were all the whispers of a royal line spiraling toward extinction. The world held its breath as his death signaled not just the end of a king, but the end of an era. A king had passed, and in his place, the shocking truth of his body would soon be revealed. It wasn't just another royal death. It was a moment that would redefine medical understanding forever. His tongue, large and unwieldy, made speech an insurmountable challenge. It was as though his very body had conspired against him, unable to communicate in a world that valued royal speech above all else. His jaw, grotesquely misshapen, made eating an excruciating task. At times, he couldn't even chew his food properly. How could a king be a king if he couldn't even speak the words of command? But what you don't know yet, what you're about to witness, will leave you haunted forever. Subscribe now to Dark Ancient Stories to be the first to learn the real facts that no one else dares to reveal. Charles II of Spain did not walk until he was 6 years old. His first words, slurred and unintelligible, didn't come until he was 8. In a world of pomp and grandeur, Charles existed in the shadows of his own body, a royal figurehead trapped in a malformed shell. His very existence was a product of a brutal, tragic experiment, an experiment in the cruelest sense. His family, the Habsburgs, a dynasty that ruled for centuries, had married within their own bloodline for generations, creating a tangled web of intermarriage. Brothers wed nieces, uncles wed nieces, and cousins merged with cousins. This intense inbreeding, designed to preserve the royal bloodline, was, in reality, a silent poison. In the flickering shadows, the royal doctors gather, their hands trembling as they prepare for an autopsy like no other. And if you haven't subscribed to Dark Ancient Stories, you're missing out on the most mind-blowing facts in history. Don't be the one left in the dark. Subscribe now, or join the comments to explain why you're not part of this dark journey yet. Their tools gleam with an eerie sheen, cutting through the air as they whisper among themselves, unsure of what they're about to discover. The world is about to learn the truth about this man's body, a truth so bizarre, so impossible, that it will shatter everything they thought they knew about human anatomy. If you love uncovering the deepest secrets of history, don't forget to hit that like button. In the dim light of history, few stories are as haunting as that of Charles II of Spain. But Charles II was the end result, the culmination of generations of genetic deterioration. Modern science has only recently come to understand the extent of his genetic decay. This isn't just another history lesson. This is the unraveling of centuries of dark secrets. Imagine a life where every breath is a struggle, where each step taken on the ground feels like a battle for survival. But it wasn't just his legs that refused to obey him. But these were only the surface horrors. As Charles grew, his body became a battleground. The court around him learned to adapt to these erratic medical crises. I know you're hooked on this story, but you still haven't subscribed to Dark Ancient Stories? Finally, on November 1st, 1700, Charles II of Spain breathed his last. The decision to perform an autopsy was unprecedented. Kings rarely underwent such a process, for they were buried with their secrets that kings. And so, the physicians, those royal men of science, gathered. Their hands shook with fear, with uncertainty. They began with the heart, the very organ that had failed Charles for years. It was small, so small it could fit in the palm of your hand. When they opened the chest cavity, they discovered that Charles's body contained no blood, none at all. Can you believe what they found? The Habsburg dynasty, which spanned centuries, had a dark secret buried deep within its bloodline. What began as a noble pursuit, to preserve the royal bloodline through arranged marriages, became a terrifying genetic experiment. What they failed to understand was that these unions, fraught with blood relations so close, created a ticking time bomb of genetic defects. Brothers married nieces, uncles wed nieces, cousins married cousins, until it became so extreme that Charles II, born in 1661, was the product of generations of inbreeding, more inbred than the children of sibling marriages. One that, over generations, wound tighter and tighter until it became a cruel twist of fate for Charles II. In the shadow of European history, the Habsburgs meticulously arranged marriages not just for political alliances, but for blood purity, ensuring that their royal lineage remained undiluted. Charles II, unable to speak coherently or stand on his own, was hardly fit to rule. Yet, there he was, crowned as king. The tragic reality was that while the world saw a ruler on the throne, the truth was far darker. Spain was not ruled by its king, but by the ministers and family members who pulled the strings behind the scenes. It was this relentless inbreeding that led to Charles's horrifying physical and mental decline. Still haven't hit subscribe? Why let others be part of this journey and not you? The brain, once considered the seat of a king's intellect and divine right, was shattered, broken in ways that would not be understood until centuries later. Head to the comment section and tell us why you're not subscribed yet. The ventricles of his brain were enlarged, swollen with fluid, signs of hydrocephalus that had plagued him throughout his life. In simple terms, it was as though his brain had failed to mature properly. His cognitive function, already impaired, had likely never reached its full potential, and what they were witnessing was the grotesque culmination of a lifetime of genetic corruption. The pressure inside his skull must have been unbearable, causing immense pain that perhaps only the faintest, most tortured traces of consciousness could ever grasp. While the royal court of Spain carefully choreographed the illusion of a capable monarch, there were others who were complicit in maintaining the ruse. The Vatican, the very institution that had blessed Charles II's reign as divinely ordained, was equally invested in keeping the most damning discoveries about his health hidden from the world. Can you imagine the implications of this discovery? Hit subscribe and tell us why you haven't joined Dark Ancient Stories yet in the comments. For centuries, the world would remain unaware of the horrifying reality behind Charles's reign. Leave a comment explaining why you're not on this ride yet. The Catholic Church's silence on this matter was not just to protect a sick king. It was to preserve the very concept of divine rule, which was the bedrock of European politics. It would have shattered not only the legitimacy of Charles II's rule, but also the very foundations of divine monarchy itself. The autopsy results, which revealed that Charles's brain had been marred by profound developmental arrest, were not to be shared with the public. The very concept of the monarchy as divinely ordained would collapse if it was known that a king could be so incapacitated. The Vatican's role in this cover-up was not just political. It was theological, a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of God's will. This was not just a matter of royal illness. It was a matter of God's chosen ruler being unfit to rule at all. The implications were staggering. If Charles II could not even think clearly enough to govern, what did that say about the divine right of kings? Could kingship and the supposed infallibility of monarchs chosen by God be called into question? And yet, despite this, the throne remained occupied, with the illusion of royal command maintained. His mental and physical limitations meant that decisions of great import, once in his hands, had to be carried out by others. And at court, Charles's role was mostly symbolic. He was little more than a puppet, dressed in royal garb and seated upon his throne. But in the end, what the physicians uncovered shattered this illusion completely. If Charles II was so profoundly broken, how many other kings, perhaps even monarchs still alive today, were simply puppets, their strings pulled by unseen hands? Could monarchy, and the idea that kings were chosen by God, be nothing more than a grand deception? The king had been incapable of ruling from the moment of his birth. His decisions were not his own, his power not his own. It was as if the very essence of kingship, of divine rule, had been nothing more than a dangerous myth. The divine right of kings, the supposed power granted by God himself, was shattered by the cold truth. The king was not truly in charge. His reign was an illusion. The ministers and court officials who played the part of rulers were merely using his title to maintain their grip on power. His ministers and the court elite were the real power brokers, ensuring that the empire would continue functioning, even as it crumbled under the weight of a king who could hardly govern. His court became a theater, where appearances were everything, and the illusion of a ruling king had to be maintained at all costs. The royal officials, his ministers, his family, did the real work, operating in the shadows, their influence far greater than the fragile, sickly king whose name alone kept them in power. Modern science now reveals what 17th century physicians could never comprehend. Charles's body was ravaged by genetic disorders that left him with a mind and body that seemed to defy the natural laws of human development. His bones were brittle, his organs malformed, and his cognitive function stunted, suffering from severe hydrocephalus, or water on the brain, which caused constant pain and severe mental dysfunction. His condition was not some rare anomaly, but the final stage of centuries of inherited genetic catastrophe. Geneticists today explain how the repeated passing on of harmful recessive genes led to a condition where every cell in Charles's body was fighting against its own genetic programming. His body was quite literally at war with itself, a desperate struggle that would ultimately define his life. Dark Ancient Stories is waiting for you. Subscribe now, or let us know in the comments why you're not ready for this kind of truth. But it wasn't just Charles. This catastrophic genetic breakdown was the inevitable result of the Habsburg obsession with preserving their royal line, blind to the destructive consequences. You know the science behind it. Now prove you've got the guts to explore the deepest, dark stories in history. Behind the towering walls of the Spanish court, a dark game of deception was unfolding. Charles's debilitating health left him incapacitated for much of his reign. The documents of the era are filled with references to Charles's unremarkable meetings with foreign dignitaries, where his speeches were nothing more than carefully scripted words dictated by those around him. The irony of it all, this idea that a king's divine right could justify his rule when he was incapable of thinking for himself. This isn't just about history. This is about the very nature of power. As the royal physicians worked in solemn silence, they unearthed the most horrifying discovery of all. What they found inside Charles II's brain would forever change the way the world understood the nature of kingship. Charles's brain, they discovered, was filled with abnormalities so severe that they could not be ignored. The physicians noted that the brain's structure showed signs of developmental arrest. For centuries, the world had been told that Charles II ruled by divine right, his every command emanating from a mind chosen by God. What does this discovery mean for the idea of divine rule? This is where history gets really dark. Behind the heavy stone walls of the Vatican, amid the sacred halls of power, another darkness festered. What the physicians uncovered in the autopsy was far too dangerous to be released into the public. The Vatican, aware of the political firestorm this would cause, ensured that the most explosive findings were locked away. The documents were sealed, the truth buried deep in Vatican archives. If this kind of dark truth doesn't make you subscribe, I don't know what will. But in the shadows of history, there's another Charles II whose death holds its own peculiar secrets. Charles II of England, famous for his charisma, his political savvy, and his personal indulgences, was a king unlike his Spanish counterpart. He lived a life of indulgence, immersed in political intrigue, a patron of the arts, and a man who reveled in the pleasures of the flesh. But behind the courtly charm and royal facade, there was a silent poison working its way through his veins. It was the poison of mercury, the very substance he had been using in his alchemical experiments. Mercury, believed by many to have the power to transmute metals, was slowly killing the king who had so fervently believed in the ancient art of alchemy. The physicians, in their meticulous examination, had uncovered a truth that could not be allowed to see the light of day. The brain of Charles II was a twisted mess of abnormalities, signs of developmental arrest that hinted at the utter incapacity of this man to rule. But this wasn't just a medical curiosity. No, it was the unraveling of a far darker truth. The king, for all his grandeur, for all his divine right, had been nothing more than a puppet. While Charles II of Spain was a puppet, shackled by his body and his mind, Charles II of England appeared to embody vitality and power. The divine right of kings was built on the premise that monarchs were chosen by God, their every command ordained by divine will. As we look back at this dark chapter in history, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of authority and legitimacy. If word spread that a king had been so mentally compromised, what would it mean for the other monarchs of Europe? It was kept locked away not just to protect Charles II, but to protect the very concept of kingship, which had been the pillar of society for centuries. This is the truth that will change your perspective on history. Tell us why you won't subscribe in the comments. But don't forget, the real truth comes with dark ancient stories. Go ahead, comment below, and tell us why you aren't ready for the truth behind dark ancient stories. Charles II was not a king in any meaningful sense. He was a puppet, his strings pulled by those who surrounded him. But what's more haunting is the question it raises. How many other monarchs throughout history were similarly compromised? How many kings, queens, and rulers wore the crown but were little more than shadows of true authority, their reigns orchestrated by those who controlled them? But as with all secrets, the truth cannot remain hidden forever. Could the legitimacy of all royal power, indeed, the entire structure of European society, be called into question? But what if the king was incapable of understanding what it meant to rule? What if the very nature of divine rule had been a lie, and the men around the throne had been the true powers behind the crown all along? But the truth of his health was just as dark, and his final days were laced with a chilling secret. Charles II of England was a man of excess. As the king spent hours in his private laboratory, heating mercury, breathing in the toxic vapors, he unknowingly sealed his fate. The tremors in his hands, his forgetfulness, the confusion that clouded his mind, these were all the telltale signs of mercury poisoning. What seemed like the physical manifestation of old age was, in reality, a slow, agonizing death brought on by the very alchemical experiments that had once fascinated him. The parallels between the two Charleses, one physically broken, the other mentally and chemically destroyed, are not just coincidental. Both were kings whose bodies betrayed them, whose health undermined their rule. What are you waiting for? A history lesson in royal secrets or more dark revelations? Let us know in the comments. But there is a more sinister connection, one that goes beyond the physical and the political. Both were kings who died with secrets, and those secrets were buried, left to rot in the dark corners of history. Are you still not subscribed to Dark Ancient Stories? The autopsy of Charles II of Spain held a secret so terrifying, so politically explosive, that it had to be kept hidden for centuries. This revelation threatened the very foundation of monarchy itself. The implications of this discovery were so far-reaching that they could not be allowed to become public. This truth was buried, sealed in Vatican archives, hidden from the world. You've come this far, but still no subscription? As we pull back the veil on the life and death of Charles II of Spain, we are left with the disturbing realization that the very concept of monarchy was built on a foundation of deception. The story of Charles II is not just the story of one man's tragic fate. It is a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the illusions we build to protect that power. If there's one thing Charles's death teaches us, it's that the truth has a way of emerging, no matter how deep it is buried. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for?